Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. US President Donald Trump imposed a new 10% tariff on imports from nearly all countries after a Supreme Court ruling. The UK government is considering legislation to remove Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from the royal succession. Trump considers a limited military strike on Iran if it fails to curb its nuclear program. The US Supreme Court has struck down key tariffs imposed by Donald Trump on Friday, ruling he overstepped his authority. In response, the administration is pressing ahead with a new 10% global tariff, keeping trade tensions in focus.
US President Donald Trump has quickly responded to a Supreme Court ruling by imposing a new 10% tariff on imports from nearly all countries. The new duties will apply for up to 150 days, with exemptions for energy products, certain minerals, pharmaceuticals, and goods covered by existing trade agreements. Trump issued a proclamation to enforce them, using a law that allows tariffs up to 15%. However, the move may face legal challenges, creating more uncertainty in global markets. The decision follows the court's rejection of Trump's use of emergency powers to impose sweeping tariffs, ruling that he had exceeded his constitutional authority. In a 6-3 ruling, the court determined that Trump's use of the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act to set broad tariffs was unconstitutional, as Congress had not authorized such sweeping powers. This decision is seen as a significant victory for US businesses and states that had challenged the tariffs, potentially opening the door for billions of dollars in refunds. Speaking at the White House, Trump called the decision terrible and insisted that his administration would continue to impose tariffs using other trade laws aimed at supporting US manufacturing.
Well, we're going straight ahead with 10% straight across the board, which was the absolute right to do. And that's taking place. That's a lot of money coming into our country. And then during that period of about 5 months, we are doing the various investigations necessary to put fair tariffs or tariffs, period, on other countries.
Despite the administration's claims that the tariffs will boost revenue and US industry, analysts warn that the ruling, along with Trump's swift response, has added fresh uncertainty to global markets.
The UK government is considering legislation to remove Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from the royal succession, a move supported by Defence Minister Luke Pollard. This comes after scrutiny over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein and a recent arrest on suspicion of misconduct. The legislation would prevent Andrew, currently 8th in line to the throne, from ever becoming king. It's expected to be introduced after the police investigation concludes. Buckingham Palace has yet to comment on the proposal. The fallout continues after the arrest of King Charles' younger brother, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Police searches are ongoing while reactions from the palace, the United States and the public continue to pour in.
Police remain outside Royal Lodge in Windsor as searches continue following the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The 66-year-old was detained on Thursday morning, his birthday, and questioned for around 11 hours. Thames Valley Police later confirmed he was released under investigation. He has not been charged and denies wrongdoing. King Charles, who was not informed in advance, said the law must take its course and pledged the royal family's full cooperation. The case has drawn international reaction. US President Donald Trump called it damaging for the monarchy.
It's a very, very sad, to me, it's a very sad thing. When I see that, it's a very sad thing. To see it and to see what's going on with his brother, who's obviously coming to our country very soon, and he's a fantastic man, the king. So I think it's a very sad thing.
At the United Nations, spokesperson Stefan Dujarric declined to comment directly, but called for stronger investigations into abuse linked to Epstein. For the family of Virginia Giuffre, who accused Andrew of sexual abuse in a lawsuit settled in 2022 and died by suicide last year, the arrest brought emotion and a sense of justice.
This is where the house of cards starts falling. And, kudos to the UK for taking the first step, for saying, you know what, we are going to arrest somebody who is held to one of the highest esteems out there, somebody who was a former prince. I mean, this hasn't been done before. And so to know what we should expect, it's really naive to say that we do, but we won't stop. I mean, Virginia said it so clearly in her statements, and I'll say it again here today, we won't stop until justice is served.
Across Britain and Europe, newspapers led with a striking image of Andrew slumped in the back of a crossover as he left the police station. Several front pages described an unprecedented moment for the monarchy. Public reaction ranged from shock to relief.
I didn't think so, no. I thought he'd go into hiding and get away with it. Yeah, so, no, that's all I've got to say, really. I'm pleased.
But the prince, I mean, that's wild. I think people are gonna really be, that affects the whole country, him being on that list. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
The investigation centres on allegations that while serving as the UK's Special Representative for Trade and Investment, he shared confidential government documents with Jeffrey Epstein. Newly released US files suggest he forwarded reports on countries including Vietnam and Singapore. Andrew stepped back from public duties in 2019 over his links to Epstein and resigned as trade envoy in 2011. It is the first arrest of a senior royal in modern times.
Hungary's Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó said that Budapest will block the €90 billion EU loan to Ukraine until oil transit to Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline is restored. He stated that Ukraine is blocking the pipeline and violating the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. Hungary will not give in to this blackmail, will not support the war and will not allow funds to be taken out of the country. On the 11th of February, the European Parliament approved the €90 billion loan package for Ukraine for 2026 to 2027. Clashes erupted in Tirana on Friday as police used tear gas and water cannon against opposition protesters demanding the resignation of Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama. The protests were sparked by corruption allegations against Deputy Prime Minister Belinda Bulucu, accused of influencing public tenders. Bulucu has been suspended from office by an anti-corruption court, but the Special Prosecution Office has called for Parliament to lift her immunity to allow for her arrest. Despite these tensions, Rama's Socialist Party holds a strong parliamentary majority, making it unclear when or if Bulucu's immunity will be lifted. Albania aims to join the European Union by 2030, but the EU says more action is needed to tackle corruption and crime. With tensions rising over Iran's nuclear program, President Trump has warned he may order a limited military strike to pressure Tehran. Meanwhile, Iranian officials say they're preparing a draft proposal to present to US negotiators in the coming days.
US President Donald Trump said on Friday that he is considering a limited military strike on Iran to pressure its leaders into agreeing to a deal that would curb the country's nuclear program. Trump warned that Iran must negotiate a fair deal and suggested that failure to do so could lead to military action.
They better negotiate a fair deal. You know, the people of Iran are a lot different than the leaders of Iran. And it's very sad situation.
These remarks came after Trump indicated on Thursday that the world would know within the next 10 days whether a deal would be reached or if military action would be taken. The US has significantly increased its military presence in the region, with the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest warship, and the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier now heading towards the area. Despite rising tensions, US and Iranian officials have been meeting in Switzerland, and Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed on Friday that a draft of a possible agreement will be handed over to US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in the coming days. Analysts are warning that the combination of stalled nuclear talks and the growing military presence has heightened the risk of a broader conflict in the Middle East, keeping the region on high alert.
Streets in Havana are empty and dark. The energy crisis has paralysed transport. The US has declared Cuba a national security threat. Oil supplies from Venezuela have been cut, and countries sending fuel to Cuba face tariff threats. Venezuela stopped shipments in December. Mexico has also halted supplies. The White House said Cuba would make serious changes soon, but did not call for a change of government. The US says it wants to see democratic and prosperous countries. US military forces said on Friday that they struck a vessel in the Eastern Pacific, killing 3 men in the latest such incident in recent months. Footage released by the US Southern Command showed the vessel coming under attack. The Trump administration has highlighted its success against vessels suspected of being involved in drug trafficking in the region. The military said the vessel was engaged in narco-trafficking operations. And now we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. S&P Global Ratings has upgraded Armenia's outlook to positive, citing stronger security and improving regional connectivity as diplomatic progress with Azerbaijan improves regional stability.
A new report by S&P Global Ratings highlights improvements in regional connectivity driven by ongoing efforts to normalise Azerbaijan-Armenia relations. The Washington meeting in August 2025 is credited with stabilising the security environment and reducing the risk of renewed conflict. Consequently, the agency has revised Armenia's outlook to positive from stable, citing improved security and resilient medium-term performance. It adds that further diplomatic progress could strengthen fiscal and external positions, though setbacks or disruptions could weigh on growth. Meanwhile, the report by S&P Global Ratings affirms Armenia's sovereign credit ratings at BB-/B. S&P projects Armenia's economy to grow around 5% annually between 2026 and 2029, supported by resilient domestic demand, private investment and a strong labour market. Fiscal consolidation is progressing, with government debt remaining moderate and the banking sector well capitalised and profitable. The report also notes that Armenia's ties with Russia remain complex. Political relations have cooled since 2023, but the country continues to rely heavily on Russian trade, energy and financial flows.
Meanwhile, Russia's economy is also far from being in a perfect shape. Restaurant margins are shrinking and rising costs are forcing closures across Russia, even in Moscow. Owners say January closures are normal after the busy holiday season, but many worry the industry is becoming too risky for small profits.
Restaurants and cafes in Russia are closing at the fastest rate since the start of the Ukraine war. Even in wealthy areas of Moscow, spending is falling. Closures are seen from the capital to Vladivostok and signal a slowdown in the $2.8 trillion economy.
Years ago, people said a restaurant should have a margin of 20 to 25%. After the pandemic, the benchmark became 15%, and that was considered good. Today, many places operate with only a few percent. Many owners would not even start this business now if they could choose again. It would be easier to put the money in a bank and earn returns there instead of taking constant risks for minimal margins.
At a cafe in southwestern Moscow, cake and pastry shelves are empty and the espresso machine is silent. Owner Yekaterina Oreshkina said they did not expect such a downturn. A slow January, a 50% rise in ingredient prices, high rent and taxes forced her to close this branch, though her other cafes remain open.
Every year in January, restaurants close. Why? Because the last quarter of the year is the peak season for the industry. October, November, and especially December are when restaurants make money. If someone decides to shut down, they usually do it in January. So this is completely logical, nothing new. It happens every year. As for the number of restaurants that closed in Moscow, there is always a balance between closures and openings. In 2025, there were still more openings than closures. For now, I don't see anything catastrophic.
As expenses climb and profit margins decrease, more businesses may struggle to stay afloat as the industry is facing another year full of uncertainty.
Kyrgyzstan has launched the construction of a major financial and investment zone in the Issyk-Kul region on Friday. The Tumchi zone is designed to become an international hub, attracting capital, technology and creating thousands of jobs. The government aims for the zone to drive economic growth with projections of a 10% annual increase in GDP over the past 4 years. Planned developments include office centres, housing and tourism facilities covering over 470,000 square metres, set to be completed by 2035. Georgian security forces say they've foiled an alleged plot to acquire and move radioactive material out of the country, arresting 2 foreign nationals in a counterintelligence operation. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
The State Security Service of Georgia says 2 foreign nationals have been arrested in Kutaisi for attempting to illegally purchase nuclear material, uranium and radioactive substance, cesium-137. According to the agency, the suspects were planning to buy the materials for $3 million and transport them to another country. The arrests were carried out by officers from the State Security Service, Counterintelligence and Special Operations Department after processing operational information. Authorities say that the suspects had been traveling to Georgia frequently in recent weeks. They were reportedly trying to create favorable conditions to purchase and move the nuclear and radioactive substances. The State Security Service warned that uranium and cesium-137 can be used for serious criminal acts, including terrorist purposes. Notably, it's not the first such case. Last year, in Batumi, 2 people were detained for handling and attempting to sell $3 million worth of uranium, which could have been used to make a deadly bomb. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Turkey has signalled its readiness to train police, rebuild the health and education sectors and contribute troops as part of Gaza's reconstruction. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan made the commitments at the inaugural meeting of US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace in Washington on Thursday.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Turkey is ready to assist in the rehabilitation of Gaza's health and education sectors and help train police forces in the embattled Palestinian territory. Fidan made the remarks in Washington at the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump. He stressed Ankara's continued support for U.S.-led peace efforts and stated that Turkey was prepared to provide troops for a proposed international stabilization force for Gaza. According to Fidan, the ceasefire in Gaza was achieved after 2 years of human suffering, crediting what he described as President Trump's personal engagement and collective diplomatic efforts for the breakthrough. But he went on to warn that Gaza's humanitarian situation remained fragile and that ceasefire violations continue to occur, calling for a prompt, coordinated and effective international response.
Biz aslında şu mesajı veriyoruz. Our message is this: whether it's humanitarian aid, the administration of Gaza, infrastructure and superstructure services, or contributing to international stabilization force, we are ready to provide all kinds of support in all these areas.
Several other countries have already pledged to send troops for the proposed stabilization force, including Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, and Albania. The initiative is aimed at ensuring security, stability, and reconstruction efforts in Gaza following the conflict in which tens of thousands of people in Gaza have been killed. While in Washington, Fidan also reiterated Turkey's hope that the United States would pursue what he described as genuine negotiations with Iran. He added that diplomatic engagement would help avert the need for a military operation or broader war in an already volatile Middle East region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Amid heightened tensions between Tokyo and Beijing, Japan and China are both expanding economic cooperation with Azerbaijan, a dynamic that reflects Azerbaijan's growing geo-economic importance at the crossroads of multiple great power interests. Japan's outreach builds on broader Central Asia investment initiatives, while China remains a key bilateral partner across trade, transport and technology. Let's bring in our guest, Ahmed Hashimi, Director at the Global Policy Institute from Washington, D.C., United States. Ahmed, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's start with context. Why is Azerbaijan attracting economic cooperation offers from both Japan and China at a time when Tokyo and Beijing themselves are grappling with diplomatic and strategic tensions?
Well, this approach stems from Azerbaijan's perspective, or Azerbaijan's approach to foreign policy, foreign relations, which is stemming from the idea of multi-vectorism or multilateralism, and a firm believer of a multilateral world. So this is one reason why Azerbaijan is open to do business, to cooperate, to expand its relationships, its ties with sometimes, let's say, opposing forces or countries that are not necessarily in great terms with each other, including China and Japan. We can also have a look at it from the perspective of a great game, rather a great power competition. And we all know that China is a rising superpower. Japan, though declining, is still a third or fourth global power. And this is very important for Azerbaijan to have a good relationship with both nations. And also another point that I would like to mention is the Azerbaijan's ascension to the status of middle power. Azerbaijan, before the liberation of Karabakh and surrounding regions, was in a different world, in a different geopolitical landscape. But after the liberation, we see that Azerbaijan now has ascended to a middle power position, even though its population, its size, maybe not in the middle power status, but we said Azerbaijan's geopolitical situation, geographical location allows it to play a role in defiance of Russia and Iran, by providing a transportation route, east-west transportation route that doesn't go through either of the countries, Russia and Iran.
And Japan's engagement is part of a broader Central Asia strategy and investments in green energy, technology and minerals. Does Azerbaijan play a strategic role in diversifying Japan's external economic track?
The short answer is yes. Japan approaches Azerbaijan through the lens of economic security and supply chain resilience, specifically to balance the influence of other major powers in Eurasia, Russia and China. So within this perspective, Japan sees Azerbaijan as a potential partner in energy, in a middle corridor, as well as in even non-oil sector integration and geopolitical balancing. If I briefly mention, dive deeper to one of these outlines, for example, in terms of energy, Japan is a pioneer in green hydrogen and renewables, and as well as in decarbonization. And in both areas, Azerbaijan has something to offer, and this creates a ground for mutually beneficial cooperation between Azerbaijan and Japan. And also, when it comes to Middle Corridor, for example, this is perceived by Japan as a strategic pivot, because again, as I mentioned earlier, this bypasses the Russia and Iran route. When we deal with East-West transportation corridor, as well as this is even beyond and above the boundaries of Azerbaijan, because we know that Central Asian countries, they are landlocked countries, and Japan has invested enormously in their infrastructure, in their energy, and in their private sector. And again, Azerbaijan provides this route, especially after the resolution of the Zangezur corridor and issues surrounding it. This allows Japan to have this connectivity via Central Asian markets all the way to Europe and global markets.
And China already has strong economic, transport and trade ties with Azerbaijan. How does Beijing's approach differ in scale or intent from Tokyo's outreach?
Again, very briefly, they have differences of mentalities, differences of approaches. I mean, Japan and China. If I briefly mention a couple of those, if I compare these differences, for example, in terms of China's approach, China's primary framework for this cooperation is Belt and Road Initiative. But for Japan, it's Free and Open Indo-Pacific framework, or FOIP framework. So BRI versus FOIP. Or in terms of economic role, China is the largest source of imports for Azerbaijan. But Japan is the source of high-tech, actually the high-tech investor and energy partner. And in terms of logistics, we see that China wants to maximize the investments in the logistics within the framework of BRI, again, Belt and Road Initiative. But Japan prefers a more niche type of investments, for example, enhancing quality and security. And when it comes to key sectors, EVs, electrical vehicles, port terminals, railway hardware, these are some of the areas that China is interested in investing in Azerbaijan. But when it comes to Japan, Japan is rather interested, again, as I mentioned, green hydrogen, AI, renewables, and securing route to EU markets. This is China's strategic goal when it comes to its ties with Azerbaijan. But when it comes to Japan shares the same idea, but also China seeks to counterbalance actually Russia's and China's influence. So Japan rather sees Azerbaijan as a platform, as a source that it can diversify its foreign policy, as well as its strategic goals, as well as its economic ties.
Ahmed, it was a pleasure talking to you this evening. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates. Thank you for watching.